Kelly, this is not an interpreting practice video. You're right, it's not. But I thought it was an interesting exercise in linguistics. I posted this on US Medical Interpreters. I've actually had a lot of people reaching out to me, non native English speakers, asking me how I pronounce these words. So, let's go through it. First, I'm going to say how I pronounce the word. Then, if I know another way that it has been pronounced or other ways that I've heard it pronounced, I'll say that. I say wash. I've heard wash. I say oil. I've heard all. I say theater. I've heard theater. I say sure. I've heard sure. I say data. I've heard data or data. My A at the end is a lot shorter, data, whereas some people say data. I say ruin, my favorite Lamb of God song. I've heard ruin. This is a point of contention between my husband and I. I say crayon. He says crayon. Crayon. I have to really try to say it that way. I say toilet. I've heard toilet or even turlet. I say spitting image. I've heard spittin' image. I say syrup. I've heard syrup. I say aunt. I've heard ant. I say roof. I've heard roof. I say root. I also say route. I think this one was actually supposed to be again. Again. I say again. Others say again. I say iron. I've heard iron. I say salmon. I think this is a lot like crayon. I've heard salmon. I say caramel. I've heard caramel and caramel. I say fire. I've heard for. I say water. I haven't really heard any other ways. I don't think that people say water. I say New Orleans. Some people say New Orleans, like the song. She's the witch queen of New Orleans. Sorry, I can't sing very well. But I've also heard Nolans, which a lot of people say that people from New Orleans call New Orleans Nolans. But I have heard that that's not true. I say pecan. I've heard pecan. I say both. I've heard both. We've already gone over this one. Again is what I say. Others say again. I say probably. Others say probably or probably. Sounds more natural when they say it. Usually it's a condensing of the word to one less syllable. I say Alabama. I've heard people drop the second A and say Alabama. I say lawyer. I've heard lawyer. I say coupon. I've heard coupon. I say mayonnaise. I've heard mayonnaise. A real enunciating of that syllable in the center. Interesting thing about this is when I saw it, it was actually spelled P-Y-G, P-Y-J-A-M-A-S. I say pajamas. My stepson says pajamas or jambos. I say cot. I've heard caught. I can't really say it. It's just a different way of saying it. I say naturally. I've heard naturally. The extra syllable. Well, really, the syllable that's supposed to be there in the middle. I say aluminum. Some people say aluminium, which is an addition of a non existent syllable. I say envelope. I've heard envelope. So I am a native English speaker. I'm also a non native Spanish speaker. But I grew up in Virginia, but a very rural area in Virginia, in central Virginia, actually. I was born in Connecticut, though, in the north, in New England. To my mother, who is from an English family, my mother does not have an English accent. My father, though, is a New Englander. He was born, I'm fairly certain, in New England. So even though I grew up in a very rural area, I don't think I have the typical rural Virginia pronunciation. But there are some words like cran. See, I'm trying to emulate my husband's pronunciation. Um, I think there are some words where I definitely have kind of a southern twang, but generally, I don't think I have a very southern accent. I think my accent, though, is pretty much all over the place. Some bonus words. Either words that I've struggled with or I've seen other people, or rather heard other people struggle with. Funny story. My little brother, he's 10 years younger than me. So he grew up in the rural area where I grew up. He was born there. And the only word that he really had an issue with was the word stairs. I say stairs. He used to say stairs, just a very southern way to say stairs. A word that I struggle endlessly with is the word Irish. Don't know why, but I smush it all together. It should be Irish. See, whenever I smush the word, I like to smush that word together. The word creek. Now, in rural areas in Virginia, especially where I grew up, where I had a creek in my backyard, a lot of people would call it a crick. Very similar to pen. I say pen, but a lot of people will say pin or pin. Pin. It's longer. It's not a short P-I-N. It's pin. So, how do you say these words? Did you run into something that I just didn't mention the pronunciation of? Or are you curious as to what the pronunciation of another word might be? Be sure to post in the comments. Also, subscribe and follow for my consecutive interpreting practice videos and any other videos that I feel like posting about linguistics. And you can also subscribe to me on Patreon, where I do regularly post my consecutive interpreting practice videos once a week. Thanks for tuning in.